figure itself is staggering. I mean, not just for football, but for like life. And at the same time, I feel like I could spend it pretty quickly. Good morning to you. Good Thursday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is Daily Shot of Steelers. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into hockey and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Penguins and Pirates in the same place that you found this. Remember that big increase in the cap that the NFL informed all its teams about a little while ago, how it was going to go from $255 up to $277? Well, guess what? Yesterday, that $277 became $281. This comes directly from NFL headquarters. That means that your favorite football team could have as much as $62 million to spend in free agency. Now, it's never that simple. I always feel like there has to be some kind of context for all this. Every team, including the Steelers, sets aside around $10 million, make sure they can sign all their draft picks and to enter the season with around $5 million or so in, walking around money, basically. Who can they get at the trade deadline? Who can they pick up the way they did Preston Smith, the way they did Mike Williams? You want to have some kind of money left over. Okay? So we're still talking about $50 million plus. Well, the top priority within that is obviously quarterback. And as we've been bandying about here back and forth all week, Justin Fields is going to end up with something in the range of $20 million at an annual cap value. So presuming that gets done and presuming everything else stays the same with the way this team's always done business, you're still talking about $30 million. Now, $30 million is no longer $60, but you now have a fuller appreciation of what's actually there. And what I would appreciate within that amount of cap space would be an outstanding outside cornerback, ideally one capable of playing either side, but if you had to pick one, it would be the right side. And to scratch one name off the list, I really liked Dante Jackson. I feel like he was a pleasant surprise, real nice trade acquisition. I think a lot of people forget how he was brought here. That was the Deontay Johnson trade. He ended up with 5 interceptions that led the team. Just, pretty good all-around player / soldier. Unfortunately, he also had the recurring back issues, and unfortunately, maybe related to those issues, he wasn't necessarily the greatest in island-type coverage. And what Mike Tomlin, and by extension Terrell Austin, prefer to do with their defense is to let their corners operate man-to-man as much as possible. And that's where this conversation turns, because as much as you can look at a position like, say, wide receiver, you can look at running back, and you can say, well, those are more important to me. Those are more important to the roster. Those also happen to be positions where you would rather go young, where you would rather go with energy, and when it comes to wide receiver specifically, where you would rather go with someone who hasn't turned all the way into some AB level diva. You might also point to the defensive line, and there are D-line available through free agency. But here again, I'm going to point back to the draft. As everybody knows, D-line is the richest position in the first round, maybe in the first 2 rounds. So if you have that opportunity to get your, I don't want to overstate this, but your next Cam Hayward or your next somebody who can be a real fixture for you up front for years to come, this is the year to do that, which always has to be taken into consideration. If you enter a draft thinking about positional need or just zeroing in on a specific position, regardless of the depth of that position in the class, that's how you come away with, gee, should we take Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis? And don't even get me started on who all was left there at the time the Steelers took Kenny. Parentheses here, and yes, I was one of those people who applauded the Kenny pick. However, I'm not paid to be a scout, nor do I have anywhere near the information nor access to such information that scouts and executives have. It's their job to get it right. It's ours, so to speak, to just talk about it. Get the corner. The last thing you want, and this might come across as something of a cheap shot, but I really don't care, is the Steelers picking a young corner and the Steelers putting that young corner into a position where he has to succeed right away. Yes, they obviously knew Joey Porter Jr., knew him really since birth. That's an extraordinary exception. Knew everything about him as a player, knew beyond everything about him as a person. But for the most part, A, this team hasn't been great at identifying corners early on. Don't make me list the list. And B, I'm not sure I want two guys that young, or if you count Corey Trice, which you should, three guys that young as part of some sort of rotation or battling for starting jobs. That's just too young at that position. Yes, young can be good at corner in the same way that I mentioned it can be good at wide receiver and running back. But this is a heavy-duty position when it comes to being able to feed off experience and knowledge, and I'd rather have at least one guy in that batch who's been around for a bit. Now, as I say this, and if you've been yelling nickel or slot through this entire segment, good for you, because when I say corner, I really should include that as well. In the same way that I like Trice, I like Beanie Bishop, but I don't necessarily like him enough to just let him fly solo. I wouldn't mind seeing support at that position as well. And by the way, when you get right down to it and you look at the Steelers' 5 losses to finish the season, and you really break it down, as I have, you'll see a lot of that fell on the slot corner position, specifically on Cam Sutton. So don't presume that the defense wouldn't be getting better by upgrading at either outside or slot corner. When we come back, J1Q. This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar. Today's J1Q comes from Keller, and it's related to yesterday's unusual show in which I talked about the media that covers the Steelers, how the fans seem to be peculiarly interested in them more than they are, it seems to me, than other teams' fans. And from there, a lot of related misconceptions to what it is that we do. Keller asks, DK, I'm interested in your take on your relationships with Mike Tomlin and other Steelers executives. Tomlin doesn't like media and seems to do a good job at talking to all of you like you're sharks in the water. But do you feel he especially doesn't care for you, DK? That has to be hard as a coach to differentiate, meaning, hey, you're just doing your job, compared to, don't think I don't know that you called for my job. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh through the whole question, but some of it's actually probably unwittingly funny. He is not the kind of guy, Tomlin, who's going to cozy up to anybody who does what we do for a living. If he's ever had such a relationship with anyone in the actual Pittsburgh media core, meaning people who cover the team, who are there, I am not aware of it. And I can promise you that he doesn't necessarily see that as enmity, because he can be friendly. He can joke around with us. He can ask how we're doing. And I know for a fact that he's gone above and beyond in situations when one of us has experienced a real life issue. So I wouldn't paint it as much as whatever that line was of yours about the swimming around him like sharks or whatever, as I would that he sees for himself the value, the benefit of a professional distance. I've never held that against him. We will talk informally, we'll BS. I have run into him a couple of times in public and we've stopped and chatted. It's just not personal. It's not, overflowing with drama or whatever. Now, to try to actually answer your question, does he, for whatever reason, not like me, whatever? The way in which he shows that when he's mad at somebody or he knows that somebody reported something a certain way, or that he doesn't like the way the questions are asked or the timing of when they're asked, he'll do it right on the spot. You don't have to wonder about this. You see it with your own eyes. You hear it with your own ears. If you hear someone, anyone, ask him a question. Again, I'm talking about people who actually cover the team. I wish there was a clearer distinction with more people about what that is. Radio people, talking heads, the ones that are on ESPN, they don't cover the team. So they're not in this conversation. The people who are around, and somebody asks him something that's, totally reasonable question. In some cases, even a positive question, like, how awesome is TJ or whatever. And you see a really curt response, and then his head turn in another direction looking for the next question, he's got a bit of a problem. If you're asking me if I've been that guy, oh yeah, I have. It doesn't last forever. He doesn't seem to hold grudges, but it's definitely been me for as long as 4 or 5 weeks in a row. But here's the most important thing that you can take away, I hope, from this response. I couldn't care less. I'm sorry. I just couldn't. In this business, we're looking for information. I say that to you all the time. As such, I am infinitely more interested in people who can give me information, including behind the scenes, than I am in anyone's head coach or manager or general manager. Because again, referring to this industry, those people don't leak. Those people don't do the stuff that we want. I'm a reporter, first and foremost, at heart and in reality, a reporter. I want to break news. I want to share with you things that other people aren't sharing because I've maybe either gotten lucky or developed a relationship or just worked harder or whatever. And I could work Tomlin for the next century and a half and not get a thing out of him. Tomlin has put up that wall between himself and the people who cover the team regularly. Now, if you're one of those people who's really engaged in this particular subject, you will know that Tomlin leaks to Jay Glazer whenever he leaks anything. Why? He knows Glazer from his football past, knows him as a friend beyond reporting, and knows him as someone who's going to put out information that will benefit both Tomlin and the Steelers in virtually every instance. You know who was breaking those stories about Casey Hampton showing up for training camp overweight and maybe he won't get a new contract or whatever? That was Glazer. Want to know why? Because Tomlin was feeding it to Glazer so that it would come around to Hampton and that maybe his big snacks would suddenly become smaller snacks. But that isn't something that any reporter can compete with. Tomlin has his right to his friends and whatever else here. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Steelers, and we're going to do another one of these tomorrow.